You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. Robin Hanson joins John today to discuss David Kipping's critique of the Grabby Aliens hypothesis. We recommend you watch David's video over on his own channel, Cool Worlds. As always, there's a link in the description and the pinned comment below. Robin Hanson is an Associate Professor of Economics and received his PhD in 1997 in Social Sciences from Caltech. He joined George Mason's economics faculty in 1999 after completing a 2-year postdoc at UC Berkeley. His major fields of interest include health policy, regulation, and formal political theory.
Robin Hanson, welcome back to the program.
Great to be here. What should we talk about?
We can talk about anything.
Okay.
Grabby Aliens, we can talk about... Actually, I have my favorite topic, and you were the person that first coined the term. The great filter, or more accurately, filters perhaps, that there is something or a series of things that prevent intelligent life from being common. And it's very easy to back this up because take a look at the universe. We don't see anything. We don't see another one, Grabby Aliens. We don't see them. We just simply see nature. And everywhere we look, that nature is all the same. So no one appears to be altering their environment out there, so far as we can tell. Now, tell us about the idea of the filters and what led you to formulate that.
Well, it was a long time ago, the late 1990s, and I was a new grad student, actually, an older returning student, but I find it hard to resist these really basic, big questions. I find that most academics shy away from them for some reason. They just seem too hard or maybe too presumptuous. I arrogantly, I guess, jump in. So there's the great Fermi's question, if you will, just why does the universe look empty? And I decided to reframe that in terms of the filter concept. That is, a non-empty universe would be a big visible alien civilization that arose somehow from an earlier point in time when it was simple dead matter. And there was some path that history went along from simple dead matter to that alien civilization. And the idea is that path must be really hard, because we see a lot of simple dead matter and we see almost nothing, basically only maybe us, that reaches the end of that path. So the idea of the great filter is that's hard. Something along that path must be hard.
Well, I can think of a lot of candidates. There's a bunch of them. And I think the one that bothers me the most, that I think about the most, is water. If you don't have any land, how are you going to master fire and do all of these things that you need to have a civilization? It doesn't preclude intelligence. But, you could see an octopus looks fairly intelligent. I mean, it's not a human, but it's not going to smelt iron.
I don't know that we know that. So the key thing to know about history is we have this collapsed version where we focus much more on the recent history than the distant history. And events lately have just been happening crazy fast compared to events a long time ago. So the simplest model of things being hard is where I call it a try step, where something just needs to keep searching in a vast space until it finally stumbles upon the right solution. And if in history things were hard in the sense of try steps, it turns out that those steps should have been roughly equally spaced in time in terms of achieving them. And that means that anything that's been happening really fast lately couldn't have been that hard. So we've done amazing things in the last, say, 10,000 or a million years. And we should be proud of those, but because they've happened so rapidly, it's really hard to see them as things that would have taken billions of years to take place if we had just kept trying. So we could have what I call a try once step, some way in which at a certain crucial point we had to stumble in a certain direction as opposed to another direction, and we could never undo it. Once you stumbled in the wrong direction, it was just done and you were never going to be able to get out of it. And we could have had some difficult steps like that in our recent history, ways in which our social organization or organization of our brain or something happened to stumble upon a certain kind of organization that if we had gone another direction, we would just get stuck there and never be able to get out of it. But it doesn't look like in the last million years, we could have had tri-steps where it would take on average billions of years to accomplish.
What seems to have taken billions of years is to get to that stage, to where you have something that is capable of creating civilization as we have now. And then everything happens fast, just within a... Yeah.
Right, but if you think about the ocean, you were saying, imagine we reached our level a million years ago and we were under the water. Could we, do industry or something? Well, it might take a lot longer, but since we did it so crazy fast, I don't feel very confident in thinking an under ocean civilization couldn't have done it in maybe 10 million years instead of 10,000.
And still, that's geologically a very short amount of time. So
right.
You do have to wonder. The question, though, what bothers me about it is physiology. Could an intelligent fish, work out a way, to build technology? Maybe if it did it long enough. But I would imagine it's a lot harder. And I'm not so sure what the timeframes are, because in our 4.5 billion year time frame, we're recent, and there wasn't anything else that we've ever seen evidence for. Just dinosaurs and trilobites and things like that. So that seems to suggest that to get to that stage takes a long time, at least based on Earth. But you can also play with ideas that it could happen much faster. So do you think that this process could have been sped up on Earth if the different circumstances had presented themselves?
Well, so again, it depends on the kind of thing that was happening in the past. So there are these simpler models. Now, one kind of a model is just a process with a delay, a fuse, basically. Something just had to step through a sequence of steps that each takes a certain amount of time until you get to the final spot. Now, for that, it might depend like what the rate depends on. So say there could be a planet metabolism parameter, say, and then a high metabolism planet might go through those steps faster than a low metabolism planet. And then, the rate of planets might depend on that metabolism parameter, which might say depend on a volume parameter. What's the volume of biomass on the planet? So I could see steps like that varying with the volume of biomass and the metabolism rate of the biomass, things like that. That's a way in which even a delay step could depend on context like that. But if we're talking like a try step, where it just has to search and finally find something at a random luck, then the rate at which you find the constant the expected time to achieve it might vary, say, on the size or metabolism. But we have these statistical analysis that conditional on achieving success within a particular lucky time period, then the actual duration of each step would be roughly equally distributed in time and history. So the best candidates for those things are the things that seem to have taken maybe 500 million years or 1 billion years in our history. And we have some candidates for those, multicellularity, eukaryotes, even just being able to process sunlight.
I do sometimes wonder, though, if those can be short-circuited. A lot is made of the prokaryotic to eukaryotic leap, of course, and that's just a pretty good candidate. But at the same time, there's been recent work that suggests, well, maybe it's actually not really so much of a leap, but a matter of symbiosis that might have happened a lot earlier. It was just by chance that it took as long as it did, in which case that changes the time frames. And you don't end up with a planet like Earth where we appear at almost the end, almost the end of its habitability. Here we are. And if that's a constant for the universe, that in itself is a solution to the Fermi paradox. Intelligence is very rare and only exists for a very short time because it shows up right about when its planet is about to die. That, of course, doesn't really account so much for M dwarfs and type K dwarfs, but M dwarfs aren't faring very well as far as habitability right now, and that just would leave type K to have a longer chance than the sun had. What are your views on that?
I think it depends, again, a lot on the viability of the ocean worlds. Most of the problems with small stars are for the land. There's, problem of the flares and the problem of tidal locking and the lack of, say, continental drift. Those are all issues for the land, but ocean worlds don't seem to suffer that much from those problems. So it's more that ocean worlds are viable for advanced intelligence, the more that the smaller stars seem viable.
Now, what about being locked in by gravity? on like a super Earth, and there are some models that show that that a majority of super Earths probably are going to be water worlds like that. But at the same time, they're going to be, you know, say 2 Earth masses, which I think is the upper limit. They think that life could exist on easily anyway. That's awfully heavy if you want to go out and be a grabby alien and start launching rockets off it. So
right, but I mean, anything that we did within a few hundred years of it being even remotely possible just can't count as obviously hard in the cosmological scheme of things. So it might be much harder in another context, but that's still different from being fundamentally hard. So, you know, when we're looking at the great filter, say, we're looking at the fact that we have roughly 10 to the 24 stars in the observable universe, none of which seem to be grabby. So we're looking for filters at that scale over billions of years. So we're really looking for huge filters. So something that took a few hundred years in our history on that basis isn't very plausible as a candidate. We need things that would take expected billions or trillions of years to be hard steps. And so then the question is, imagine an advanced civilization like us stuck under the ocean on a heavy planet. Okay, yes, it'll take them longer, but will it take them trillions of years?
probably not. Probably not. If there is indeed a physical way to accomplish it one way or another, and then it isn't hard. It's just you're waiting. Even if waiting is just waiting for a grabby alien civilization to come along and pull you out of your ocean.
Maybe they just build ladders, or maybe there's lots of there's possible physics solutions, right?
Big rockets. I mean, if you've got so there are solutions, and then there are certain things like space elevators and all that might serve them better than big SpaceX rockets and things like that. Now, hard steps, and this is a related idea. The hard steps that you have to go through these doors, and it doesn't seem likely that a lot of civilizations are going to make it through all of them. I think it was calculated at 6. What's your view on that? And more importantly, is Grabby Aliens actually predicated on that?
I've seen a couple of papers lately and videos which have challenged either the hard steps view or the Grabby Aliens view. And basically, some of them are saying there are no hard steps in our history. So, there are many possible kinds of steps we could have had in our history, including delays and maybe waiting for some other event to be ready, or a try once step or a try step. And it's the try steps that we call the hard steps if they have an expected duration that's really long, like say many billions of years. So lots of stuff probably happened in our history, but were any of them try steps is the key question. So if none of them were try steps, you see, then the probability of reaching our level here could be pretty high unless there were some really hard try once steps. And that's not crazy. I tend to think that there are just so many possible ways our history could have gone. The chance that none of our past would be attributed to a try step seems unlikely, but it's not crazy. But nevertheless, I would focus on the key idea that you look out in the universe and you see nothing. So clearly something has to be really hard here. A key question is, how hard will it be to go from where we are now into this being a visible civilization? At that point, actually, I find it that hard to believe that there's try steps in our future. That is, I can see maybe, try once steps, we kill ourselves, or some delay steps, but a try step that would be of the same difficulty as anyone in our past would be something that takes expected billions of years to complete. And I just find it really hard to believe that given where we are now, it would take billions of years to actually expand to the universe. Seems like we could do that at most in 1 million years.
Well, if you've got 1 million years, even at sublight speeds, you've got the galaxy, essentially, as long as you're willing to go slow.
Right. I'm just talking about when you even start the process. Could we even get started in 1 million years?
Yeah, whenever you start. Well, would you say that we are now at the very start of becoming grabby?
Well, we're clearly within view in some sense of the possibility. We can't do it now, but by some estimations, it might possibly be something we could do within 1,000 years, maybe even shorter.
Possibly so.
1,000 years is just crazy short time on a cosmological scale. So
insanely
Right.
short. But look at what we've done over the last 1,000 years. I mean, we grab a cell phone, look at that, and then say,
Right.
what did they
Well,
have
so
1,000 years ago?
So it seems to me like, I think within 1,000,000 years, will we either be grabby or we never will, like by killing ourselves or something. And so that means this next step between now and becoming grabby is, it's not at all certain, but whatever is the difficulty, it isn't a try step with an expected time of billions of years.
Do you see a point where civilization can actually become so grabby that it goes to a nearby galaxy? It goes through the trouble of crossing intergalactic space, by whatever means.
In fact, our analysis of grabby alien civilizations just makes the very simplest model that once they start expanding, they expand at a speed and they just don't stop. And I think that's roughly right. That is, once they got into the ability to expand, I don't think the gap between galaxies would be an obstacle. So they would just keep expanding. That doesn't look like there's maybe, dragons between stars that are hard to get through, but whatever there are between stars, that's probably no harder than getting between galaxies. That is, it seems like if you just drift long enough, go far enough, you'll get between them.
Well, and it also has to be said that empty intergalactic space is not empty. There are stars out there. They're just not organized into galaxies. There's just, ones that have been ejected.
Right, but your expected chance of hitting one or something near it as you're flying through is going to be really small.
Unless you know about it. Yeah, right. It's going to be very small, but if you know about it and you're like, well, there's a gas station. Yeah. Now, in regards to, there's been a recent video by Dr. David Kipping that offers a counterpoint to this. What are your thoughts on that, on his view of Grabby Aliens?
His paper or his video and another two papers I saw recently all seem to share this feature that they think it's really unlikely that we now would ever become grabby. So they even think like maybe on Earth it was more likely than not that someone like us would evolve on a planet like Earth. And if it's really likely that we would have evolved here, and yet none of the 10 to the 24 stars we see have gone grabby, then you have to be estimating a really low chance, not just 1% or something. You mean like 1 part in 10 to the 20 chance of us becoming grabby. And that's just really hard for me to believe. I mean, I don't think it's obvious we will, but I think we have at least 1 in a million chance.
Oh, I think it's better than that. I mean, look, this planet.
Well, yes, but all I need is to say, if there's at least a 1 in a million chance,
that's
then
enough.
That's in conflict with these analyses that need to assume a much, much lower chance.
It is, and then eventually there's being forced to be grabby eventually, because Earth's time is limited as far as habitability, so we're gonna have to go somewhere else if we're still here, or die, which I don't think we will. I think we probably, if we are capable of it, we'll head out to Europa or Titan, or just follow the wave out, and eventually gotta move to the next star system, although I suspect we'll probably have done that a long time before then. But if we hadn't, eventually you're forced to, because you have to find a new home eventually, unless you can eke out some kind of existence around a white dwarf on cinder planets. So almost seems like eventually you have to become grabby if you're long-lived. Would you agree with that, or would you throw in pepper that with caveats?
So we're mainly focused here on the idea that there's at least a small chance. So if we say there's at least a small chance, then that is in conflict with these other models that require a really crazy low chance. So for the purpose of talking about those models, all we have to do is argue about, is there at least a small chance? So for that, we don't need to talk about a typical case or what would motivate us perhaps typically. We just need, in a small fraction of cases, it happens. So the arguments against that need to put some sort of barrier, sort of pretty universal block that would prevent it. They can't just talk about typical cases, right? But if I'm thinking about how big is the filter in front of us, I have to think about what's the most likely thing that will prevent us from expanding. The thing that most easily comes to people's minds is going extinct. We just completely destroy ourselves. When I think about that, that's actually pretty hard to do. Even a world, wide nuclear war wouldn't do it. wouldn't kill all humans.
Oh, it's very, very hard.
Right.
It is very hard to go to extinct, and I think that that's not stated enough in this day and age. That you're right, a nuclear war will not do it.
Right.
Rapid, drastic climate change isn't going to do it. There's just not very many things that can cause human extinction. And if you get multiple planet or multiple star systems, you get Grabby, you are not going extinct.
So certainly spreading across multiple star systems will make it much harder. So then, I mean, at least to go extinct from a war or even a pandemic or something, or a resource, or asteroid or supernova or things like that. But I actually think the most likely scenario by which we would not become Grabby is, in fact, a world government that chooses not to.
Oh, that certainly could happen.
Right. That is, I actually think I see now, when people talk now about the possibility of interstellar colonization, a lot of people don't like the idea. And the reason they don't like it makes some sense. So, up until recently, the world was full of conflicting empires, right? People fighting fiercely often and not agreeing on things and not being able to enforce any civilization level rules. And then in the last century, we have formed a global elite culture with a set of sort of global rules that we enforce together. And that's allowed us to have an integrated society, to have a more peaceful society, to have more gains from trade across the whole world, and to share a culture that we can enforce. And part of that will be in the future, not letting people get too strange if we don't want them to. And I think that will be more of an issue in the coming centuries. People will like being part of a shared civilization that shares morality rules and behavior rules and enforces them and successfully coordinates to keep a peace and to keep rules and to prevent strangeness.
Which doesn't sound that bad.
Right, but then they'll realize the moment anyone's allowed to leave the solar system and start colonizing another star, that's the end of that era. Those colonists will be able to change without limit. Their descendants could go off in all sorts of directions and change themselves and have different moral rules and become powerful and then come back and contest for control with here. Letting any colonist leave is, in fact, the end of a coherent civilization. It's the era, beginning the endless era of competition and change. And that could scare people and put people off, and they may just say, no, we don't want that. We'd rather just all stay around here and be together and get along and be able to enforce our rules on each other and be at peace with each other.
All right. Now you could call that, let's call it Hanson's paradise solution to the Fermi paradox, in that potentially one solution is quite simply everybody ends up turning their planet into a paradise and nobody wants to leave it, and it would be silly and dangerous if they did.
Right. Well, it's the everyone problem, right? I mean, if I said, what's the most likely thing that prevents us from expanding, that's my best guess. But I can't put that at more than a 99% chance of happening for us. So I got to leave at least a 1% chance that we go out and expand and have forever more conflict and change. So that means, this is maybe a 1% part of the Great Filter, a factor of 10 to the 2 out of 10 to the 24. Still only a tiny part of the filter, and so we still face the question of explaining why the rest of the universe looks so empty. This can only be a small part of the explanation.
I guess you could go the opposite direction, go really dark with this, and that, might it also be possible with a tyranny? In other words, a tyrannical government that says, no one leaves, you are all stuck here no matter what.
Well, that's pretty much the same scenario, modulo some marketing descriptions. Of course, a tyranny would try to present it in everyone's best interest.
Do you think a civilization can become too comfortable to become Grabby? In other words, I'm not talking about a utopia like this. Or a tyranny. I'm talking about people just say intelligence evolves out. In other words, you no longer need intelligence, so you just sort of become no longer capable of continuing the building of technology in order to achieve grabbiness, and that you just end up dumbed down, for lack of a better term.
I would think of it more in terms of internal levels and types of competition within our civilization. So in the past, we had fierce competition, but we had very low levels of technology and very slow rates of innovation, not because people wouldn't have wanted to, they just didn't know how. So in the future, we might not have much change or risk taking that would require either little competition, that is, people weren't really forced to try new things or to take chances because they weren't threatened much, or somehow lost the ability to innovate and be technical that we somehow couldn't get back again. I guess both are in principle possible. But look, even in the past when we had very low rates of innovation, it was still pretty consistent. So like foragers for 1 million years roughly doubled every 250,000 years. So it's a very slow rate, but it's still a rate. And then the farming area doubled roughly every 1,000 years, a rate 250 times faster, but still much slower than our world today. So even if we lost the ability to have rapid technical change, that's still not the same as losing the ability to have any technical change. And even doubling every 1,000 years for 1 million years still gets you enormous distances. So I would have to say, unless we have a crazy drastic reduction in our ability to innovate, the main thing would have to be a loss of competition. A way in which there's a central government that says, no, you can't compete in this way, or way everybody is somehow fat and happy, and we don't allow variations to compete with that.
And you also have to wonder about technology, because if you, sorry, I'm an apocalyptic science fiction author. This is where I started, and I always think of the really bad things. But as we develop artificial intelligence and human brain augmentation, and I know you have some experience with that, life extension and, Alcor and things like that, which I support those as well. I think it's an interesting proposition. But you also run into scary things like with brain implanting, a government that can tell you how to think, and everyone is in lockstep. You become the Borg, and that if that's widespread and that stands against aliens becoming grabby, that's a somewhat scary solution, don't you think? And we do seem to be moving towards that in some ways. Would you agree, though?
So there is substantial cultural support, I think, for limiting competition and limiting expansion so that we can stay this happy integrated civilization. I think the problem is we have been functional in part because of a history of competition. And if governments repress competition too much, they may not have an alternative way to maintain functionality. So an overly aggressive, repressive government, you see, may fail by simply decaying away into dysfunction. And now the question is, can anybody at a later point in time escape from its clutches when it's decayed far enough to cause a new era of regrowth? The worst case scenario would be a government that's very repressive and very tightly in control and can't prevent decay. That is, it doesn't know how to stop itself from slowly becoming less functional, but it knows how to stop anything else from breaking away from it and competing with it. And the natural result of that is extinction. You just shrink to nothing. At the very last minute, the very last person still has the gun to the head of the very second to last person.
Or they just both decide to turn the lights out and that's it. See ya.
Right.
Which eventually, that's a scary thought, because eventually, if indeed that, then this is another hypothesis, that we're simply early in the game as far as alien life goes, and that there aren't very many others just because there hasn't been enough elapsed time. Now, I don't know that I buy that, but that's been put out there.
Well, so again, the issue is how unlikely. So if we think about the percentile rank of alien civilizations and where do we sit in that rank, the most obvious assumption to make to me is like roughly at 50%, maybe somewhere between 20 and 80%, right? So if we're somewhere between 20 and 80%, then we have to expect that 20% of things have already appeared by now, right? At least. And so we have to wonder if we could see them. You might say, no, we're at the 1%. And I'm still going to say, okay, but now they're just a little farther away, but we should still see them. And now you say, oh, no, I mean 1 in a million. And I say, well, that's a crazy unlikely thing to assume, right? You're assuming that we are the first out of 1 million, say, and now farther, the nearest one is farther away. But I just don't think you're really winning on the assuming we're earlier in the percentile and therefore the nearest one is farther away. But we can see a really long way away. And I don't think you're really gaining that much in explanatory power in assuming we're rather early, but not crazy early. Because, okay, there's fewer of them out there, but still we should see them.
Well, and the other thing too, and this is my particular problem with it, is that there isn't anything that says that someone couldn't have been here earlier. It seems that the universe could have been supporting a civilization and life multiple billions of years before we came along. We're only here because Earth happened to form at the time that it did. If it was 8 billion years old, it still would have been possible. And again, that would have meant that we would have appeared much earlier, billions of years ago, and we should be grabby if we had. And we see nothing. We see absolutely nothing. And we look at galaxies, nearby galaxies, and none of them appear to be altered.
So the hard thing is, imagine an advanced civilization appeared many billions of years ago somewhere nearby. How is it that we see no appearance of its impact at all anywhere? It would have to have just completely died and killed itself. But that's really hard to do. We talk about how hard it will be to kill humans on Earth right now, but once we spread across thousands of star systems, that gets even harder. So it's really hard to believe that they all killed themselves. And that's why there's nothing left. Or we could just postulate that they just had an obsession with not having any visible impact. I think that's the kind of assumption you have to be drawn to. They showed up a while ago and they are obsessed with not messing with the natural appearance.
Maybe, but that gets into things like zoo hypothesis and all of those sorts of things. What's your view on that?
Right. But I think it has an important implication. If there is an alien civilization out there and it's obsessed with making no impact, it's probably also obsessed with preventing anyone else from having an impact, right?
Zoo hypothesis.
The obsession with preventing any impact would have to be an obsession with watching out for the rise of new civilizations that would then might have an impact, right? So an obvious prediction is not only have they been preventing themselves from spreading out and having an impact, they are watching for other new arrivals who might have an impact and selecting them and making sure that they don't have an impact. So this has the disturbing scenario that there really are aliens somewhere nearby watching us and not too happy with the prospect that we might soon have an impact.
And they stop us and they stop everyone. And that gets into, for example, abiogenesis sort of parallels this. We only have one type of life on Earth and it's all related. But if abiogenesis occurs a lot and it gets eaten every time it appears on Earth, within minutes, then
right.
the original life form is the dominant one, and that's the way the universe works all the way up into technology, because there's somebody out there that hides.
So we can go a little farther. Look, surely an advanced civilization watching out for any other civilization that might have an impact has the easy option of, as soon as it sees them get it all advanced, it just wipes them out. And clearly they didn't do that to us, right? So we can conclude they would rather persuade us than force us to follow their rule of no impact. And then we might wonder how they would persuade us.
Well, unless the giant near speed of light kill pineapple, it's just, let's say it's shaped like a pineapple the size of the planet, it's going to knock Earth out, we wouldn't see it coming until it hit. So, but then again, they'd have to know when to send the pineapple.
I mean, they could have seen life on Earth billions of years ago, and that would be a pretty rare thing. And then they could have seen advanced life here, millions of years ago. So they would have had plenty of warning.
Doesn't look terribly likely.
But again, it doesn't look terribly likely. I mean, the obvious explanation for the universe looking completely empty is that it is completely empty, right?
Well, that's the simplest answer, of course, yeah. Oh, well, I have to ask this question again, and I am skeptical of this one myself, but it's going to show up in the comments. What is your view of the idea that we just simply don't know how to see Grabby aliens? We don't know what an alien civilization actually looks like if it's 10,000 years or 10 million years more advanced than we are, and that we're just in an age where technology is very detectable, but maybe theirs isn't.
So you have to start making some assumptions here about the sort of tendency to spread into different niches. So in the history of life on Earth, if you have some kind of life, it will of course spread into whatever seems the most promising niches it can find, but it will also spread into the least promising niches. It'll just spread into all the niches, right? And now if you look in the history of human civilizations and say explorers, they just went in a lot of different directions, most of which didn't work out very well. They didn't always go everywhere. There's some scale effects, but they just went a lot of different ways. And the few things we see that are populated now are the rare successes where some group went somewhere and it turned out to work out well. So if you reason about our descendants, I think in order to say, look at the universe around us, why is it empty? Oh, because they went somewhere else. You have to say, well, okay, maybe most of them went somewhere else, but why didn't any of them come this way?
Well, there are some people that say that they did, and that the UFO-UAP phenomenon represents it, but I'm not satisfied with that either, obviously. What are your views on that? Do you think that...
So I think there are some disturbing UFO reports. And I think you have to ask, what's the prior on them actually being aliens? So think about a murder trial. In a murder trial, we might ask, well, here's an accusation against a particular person murdering another one. We're going to be asked if we believe it, but we have to start out with, what's the prior for this being true? If the prior was low enough, we would just say, no, I'm not going to listen to your evidence. That's crazy. And in a typical murder trial, the prior is, well, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance any one person is murdered, and say roughly 1,000 people associates who might have done it. So there's maybe a 1 in a million prior that this person could have murdered that person. And with a 1 in a million prior, that's high enough that we're willing to listen to the evidence. We don't say, oh, that's crazy, unlikely. Just don't talk to me about it, because that couldn't have happened. We go, well, commonly available evidence is often able to overcome a 1 in a million prior. And so for UFOs, you have to ask, well, what's the prior here? If it was, if the prior was like 1 in a quadrillion or something, you might well say, no, that's so crazy. I'm not going to look at your evidence. It's far more likely your evidence was just created by accidents, even if they're very unlikely accidents, than actual aliens, right? Well, I thought it should be my job to sit down and figure out what would a reasonable prior be, because I'd done this Grabby Aliens work, and I sat down and I did that, and I thought a plausible prior is, say, roughly 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000. And at that prior, I'd say, well, you do gotta look at the evidence. You can't just wave it away saying that's crazy and likely. I'm not an expert in the particular evidence. I can just look at enough and I can say, well, I can't just easily dismiss that. That's kind of disturbing. And somebody else should look at that evidence. So that's my position on the UFOs, is it's not crazy. It certainly might be wrong, but it's not crazy, and somebody should be looking at that. And then my job is to come up with the most plausible scenario that could make sense of it. And again, I think the most plausible scenario is we have panspermia siblings. Life on Earth didn't start on Earth, it started somewhere else. And then when it spread from there to here, it also spread to all the other stars in our stellar nursery, say roughly 10,000 stars. Those spread across the galaxy in a ring after the initial birthing years in this initial nebula. And then there were 10,000 other stars that were seeded with life that one of them could have gotten to an advanced level before us. And then if it did, and it had one of these rules against expansion, then it would search us out, its other siblings, to get us to not expand also.
I don't think that's been discussed enough, because the sun's birth cluster, there was a lot of stars in close proximity, and we're starting to see chemically similar stars to the sun that appear to have been, or at least candidates to have been in the same birth cluster. And you would assume, you're not going to really end up with, planets around just one of them. They're all probably going to have something. And if panspermia is occurring like that and life didn't originally come from here, then that's an interesting thought, because that means that there's related life all scattered through the Milky Way at this point. But again, none of them appear grabby if they're there,
Right. So most likely, most of them just didn't ever reach an advanced level like we have. But if one did, it would have just remade the galaxy unless it had some rule against that.
That's interesting. For all we know, some of those planets may never have even hit photosynthesis. The conditions may not have been right, and it's all just anaerobic microbes still.
But the hard steps model says that, look, it's just really hard, and they probably didn't get for the first 2 steps.
Yeah. And
we're at step 6, say, right?
Right. And now, say step 6 is supposed to be the hardest, right?
Well, all the steps would be roughly similar hard.
Roughly similar hard. I see.
That is, we couldn't tell.
When you look at time,
we would just see them roughly equally spaced in time, and we wouldn't really be able to tell which were the harder ones. We would just know all of them were hard.
Now, what is the solution to the Fermi paradox, and the solution to why we see Grabby Aliens that disturbs you the most? And for me, that it would be the zoo hypothesis. But which one do you look at and say, that's not a very nice one?
I mean, I look out and I say, there is definitely a huge great filter. And the question is it behind us or ahead of us? And clearly, it's more disturbing to think of a filter ahead of us than behind us. However difficult the steps were behind us, we're past them. Not so disturbing now that we're past them, right? The disturbing scenario is that we face a filter in front of us. Again, I don't think that can really be a try filter, but it could well be some other kinds of filters, killing ourselves, or most plausibly deciding not to expand. So that's the scenario that disturbs me, is that we will decide not to expand.
Especially in light that we're right now about to remove a great filter, which is asteroid impacts. You know, we're already able to deflect them, and in 100 years, it'll be something that we just probably have an innate ability to do with our technology.
Right.
And that was obviously the big filter for the dinosaurs. But if there still lies an unknown great filter in the future, something we don't know about,
I think an outside astrophysical force just isn't very plausible as a future filter, because we can see the rate in the past is low, right? They don't happen every 100 years. The rate at which enormous things kill off huge fractions of life on Earth is rare. And so it looks like if we say, how long should it take us to become Grabby? I'd say 1,000 years. And I'd say the fraction of outside impacts that happen in a typical 1,000-year period is just really low. So that means that's just not a concern in our near future. But things we could do to ourselves, those are problems. Or something that could really slow us down.
Well, things that we could do to ourselves. What are your thoughts on artificial intelligence? And does it actually pose an existential threat to humans?
So the artificial intelligence of any sort just can't be an explanation for the great filter, because if unfriendly AIs kill off the humans, they would still plausibly go on to expand and make a visible impact. So it could be a bad outcome, but it's not plausibly an explanation for the great filter.
It's not, you just end up with a machine civilization. Yeah.
Right, and then it's still visible, and so it's still, its absence is still something to be explained. Now, I said my biggest concern was that we would choose not to expand, but a related concern is that we are now going to lose innovation in the next few decades, and then not get it back for several centuries. So we've been on an innovation tear for a few centuries now, and that's gone along with increasing economy because of an increasing population. And straightforward economic theory suggests that as population declines, innovation would then decline in more than proportion. And so innovation will basically grind to a halt. So population expected to peak in maybe 3 decades or so, and then innovation will be declining. And if we let population falls by, say, a factor of 10 or 20, you'd see a fall in the innovation rate by that scale. And then we would just have several centuries of not much innovation. And then the revival eventually of innovation would come from, say, groups like the Amish or Haredim, who would take over the world by continuing to double their population every 20 years, but they probably wouldn't pick up innovation again for a while because they're not really that pro-innovation. And so we could just face a long delay here, and we might lose the habit of innovation, and maybe that would take a lot longer to pick up again. And now you've got a lot longer history where more things can go wrong.
And you can also have, imagine situations where innovation is stopped, not just by population growth of groups that are anti-innovation, but the population at large eventually having a reason to become anti-innovation themselves. In other words, it favors stagnation, right? Because there too many people built too many androids. We don't need them.
Well, the burst of innovation in the last few centuries is a historically very unusual thing, and you have to wonder how fragile it is. So when the first nations on Earth started to be very innovative with the Industrial Revolution, Holland and then England, as soon as they started to grow and become powerful, then other nations on the Earth felt like they needed to try to copy them, or they to be left behind. So they tried to copy the innovation promoting attitudes of Western Europe, including their liberality, in order to not be left behind. And so if innovation goes away, there will no longer be a need to be open and innovative and liberal. in order to not be left behind. So more plausibly, they would revert to their more natural authoritarian styles. If we have a much more authoritarian and stable conservative regimes and societies, it might take a long time for them to revive the habit of innovation.
What comes to mind is Planet of the Apes. You uplift the apes take over, and that stagnates innovation because they just aren't very innovative.
But again, like even a factor of 100 slower innovation is still plenty of time on cosmological scales.
Plenty. It's plenty. Any innovation. And you would have to stagnate to such an extraordinary degree that I just don't see it. I mean, even if we had a nuclear war, we would have our technology back within a matter of years and decades. You know, we know about all this stuff. And I don't think that we would be able to actually not rebuild it, you know?
Yeah, that's why I'm more worried about intentionally choosing to forbid innovation or expansion or colonization. I can more plausibly see a mid-level power hasn't collapsed completely, still has abilities of surveillance and repression, and it chooses not to allow innovation or expansion because of agendas. And now this needs to be global. It needs to be a civilization-wide governance.
It has to be global. It is. It does. And I don't know. I suppose a world government eventually will happen, but our attempts at it, like with the UN and things like that, have not been successful so far. But I don't know how fractious alien civilizations are. Just that we're fractious.
Well, we're closer than you think, actually. Sorry. So what we have is a pretty unified world community with norms. So if you think about COVID, the very beginning of COVID, the usual public health experts said the usual things about what to do in a pandemic, and then elites around the world talked about it for a month. At the end of that month, they came up with a different answer from what the usual experts had said, and then the entire world basically did it this new elite way, with very few exceptions. If you look at regulation in many different areas, similarly, we see very strong convergence around the world in regulation of banking and nuclear power and medical experiments and airlines and all sorts of things. So we actually have a pretty strong shared consensus around the world on many things. For example, there's only one country in the world that now allows organ sales, which happens to be Iran. And bioethicists are getting together all the time trying to talk about how are we going to get Iran to stop this. And that's true for a lot of things where there's no exceptions or one exception, and the world is working hard to prevent and stop those exceptions. So even though we don't have a central world government, we do in fact have a world mob.
Yeah.
That gets its way. So we're a lot closer than you might think to a world that agrees on some things, like agreeing that certain kinds of technologies just aren't going to be allowed.
Well, cloning. We seem to have more or less, we haven't seen human cloning.
Right.
Yeah.
And nuclear, really. We've kind of, we really, cut the legs out of under nuclear. We have prevented genetic engineering of many sorts, and we could well want to prevent other kinds of technology that seem threatening, including ways that we might change ourselves. And then later on, we will realize interstellar colonization is this uber change. Once you allow interstellar colonization, you can't prevent a huge space of changes.
Very well possible. Very well possible. I think it would actually really, we might confront this earlier than we think we might, because if you get a Mars colony and nobody controls that Mars colony except those colonists, then you have a potential enemy. And I don't know if you could have an interplanetary war very easily, but you could have conflict for sure.
Right. Well, conflict within the solar system is not such an issue that we can have a global civilization now on Earth because we can communicate easily and travel easily and lob bombs at each other easily. And that remains true within the solar system. The solar system is small enough that we will have cheap, fast travel, communication, and bomb lobbing. But once you leave the solar system for another star, suddenly those things are no longer so cheap and easy. The time delay for lobbing a bomb is just way too long.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't think it would come to that. I think it would come to just power plays. We want to control that Mars colony. The Mars colony says, no,
right,
we're cutting off all contact with you. And then Earth says, well, you're not getting any more goods from Earth. Good luck on self-sufficiency on that rock out there. And I could see things like that happening. But at the same time,
that's happening on Earth right now.
That's happening on Earth right
now.
Yeah.
Trade restrictions as a way to, try to bring some nations to heel.
Yeah,
from elite
absolutely.
consensus.
Sanctioning. Yeah. Now, there is one encouraging thing, though, regarding becoming Grabby and not putting the kibosh on it with a government, is that they don't appear to be doing it. Everybody seems to want to go to space. And we have China, we have India, we have the United States, we have Russia, we have, all of these countries, and everybody in some way or another is involved. And it doesn't look like there doesn't look at this point to be an anti-space movement forming up, but that could change.
Right, but again, it's only leaving the solar system that's the threat, not going into space.
True. But at the same time, leaving the solar system for us right now would be hard. Maybe little microprobes.
Right, so the question is, will there be opposition that forms once people realize the implications of somebody leaving the solar system and it becomes an actual option?
Going to be an interesting future indeed. I don't know. That's seems to be a fertile territory for the sci-fi authors to imagine as, interstellar rivalries that could form up between people that originated on the same planet. And that could be a reason to pull back and not allow it. Very interesting ideas. Thanks, Robin, for joining us today. And I look forward to perhaps another conversation in the future as the great debate over the Fermi paradox continues, which could end on a dime if somebody sees something. But we haven't yet.
Not today.